So the year was 2022. The episode is number 384. We're back into the retrospective. It's been months. So we're switching all over the place. This is a time machine. In this episode, as we go back and look at the episodes that led us through the first 500, which is what the retrospective is, in this episode, we do part of our series that dealt with films that define their decades, and we started this episode, this number 384, with the 1950s. So we're going to discuss this, and we'll keep moving, highlighting various points and kind of revisit what we've done in a way that reflects on what's happened since we did those episodes and what might be happening now, and just putting little footnotes on those episodes and revisiting and enjoying and continuing to be paranoid as we were in the 50s. Post-war paranoia defining the 1950s. Rick, go ahead.
You know, it's interesting because when we left off this series, we were in the midst of a presidential election. There was a little bit of hope that things wouldn't go sideways and things wouldn't go into the shitter in the way that they did. Kamala Harris was thrust upon the American public as a presidential candidate, and now, I don't know, 3 or 4 months later, we're seeing the results of that kind of stranglehold on government. And what we're seeing now is a rehash of what happened 8 years ago, but to a degree but much worse. Yeah. And that's, obviously our opinion. And if you want to go down the long-winded and pretentious label that has been thrown at us a couple of times, then, fuck you. And, we all have an opinion. Start your own fucking podcast looking for the handful of movies that endorse your politics. But I think it's very fitting that we're starting this memory lane series, or restarting this memory lane series with a look at one of our other series that we did that was and it being post-war paranoia. If you know anything about history, you remember the Cold War, you remember McCarthyism, you remember Hoover, you remember all of this shit that was coming down on society, and how oftentimes film, television, and entertainment reflect those times. The 1950s were a period of intense paranoia, and it was a time where we didn't know if there was going to be a tomorrow. I don't want to sit here like Cassandra, imagining the doom that is in front of me, but it's hard not to look at the world that we're in right now and not have some sense of at least historical deja vu. So, post-war paranoia defining the 1950s. I love the idea that we could go back and that film is kind of like a historical yearbook or photo album of the shit that we've been through, and the commentary that speaks volumes about the culture. The 1950s were arguably a horrible decade, and I think the films reflected quite a bit of that. Although it was a period of film noir that was really starting to question the American ideal and the idea of us as a country where the American dream was faltering. And I think with those episodes, especially coming right after the George Carlin's American Dream episode, it's very telling that everything new is old, and we're just back mired in the shit. I don't remember the episode all that well, except to say that what we were doing was this recognizing the subtle contrast between the world that we were living in and the world that we were told we were supposed to. The 1950s are Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, for those who remember black and white television of that era. And, you know, neither you or I were raised during that time, but a lot of these shows were a nostalgic experience that we were watching in reruns. So we've always, it's weird. I don't know if other countries do this in the same way that we do, but American culture, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, lived in a sort of nostalgic past.
Yeah, we lived in syndication.
What's that?
We lived in syndication.
Yeah, we did. We absolutely did. It was a longing for a past that never really existed, but that we were told was the good old days. And it's kind of telling that Donald Trump would make his mantra, "Make America Great Again," and you automatically go back to Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, My Three Sons. You go back to the nuclear family and how it was presented on television.
To Godzilla. You go back to fucking Godzilla.
Well, if you're in Japan, yeah, you do realize that nuclear holocaust began with that. And I think we did talk a little bit about Godzilla, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean the format, the just to remind people more and to kind of bring in those of you who aren't familiar with what we're doing. Rick suggested a series where it was like, let's go back and look at every decade of cinema, and let's not choose. You know, we're doing it independently. He would do his list and I would do mine, but let's not pick like the so-called what we think are the best films of that decade. Let's make a list based on what we think are the films that define that decade. And so we developed a kind of method where we would make our list, and then we would go back and forth. So, as an example, and this is kind of like a teaser trailer bullshit, like you said for 10, because I found it and I found the notebook, you said Touch of Evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we would start from 10 and we would go to 1. But we would go back and forth and we would talk about it. But if, for example, Touch of Evil was also on my list, but it was higher up on my list, so we would hold talking about it until it got to the higher position.
Yeah.
So then we bounced to, mine was Horror of Dracula. We talked about it. We bounced back and forth. The ones that we had in common were Touch of Evil, Godzilla, 12 Angry Men.
Mm-hmm.
We got into some Hitchcock. We got into other stuff. But what's interesting are the differences and the things that are also the commonalities, because it's like, okay, well, why? How obvious is it, or how not obvious is it? Godzilla was one where that we both kind of like zeroed in on, because it's like, well, the premise of Godzilla is that this monster comes out and threatens Japan. And if we look at our current position, I mean, I think that Godzilla is like a good metaphor for the American monster. And I mean, I think it's always been a good fucking metaphor. But particularly now, where it's not only like so-called the foes, but it's also the friends that are going like, why the fuck are you lashing out against me? We're your ally. What the fuck? I think the monster has reawakened. The monster of MAGA, the monster of the stuff that the people who buy into that, who support all of those causes, and that, you know, that goes back to the fucking the beginnings of this series, where we looked at fucking the first episode of this 500, not 500, sorry, I'm mixing my series. The first episode of the films that define the decades was about Birth of a Nation.
Mm-hmm.
And Birth of a Nation was a looking back at the Civil War era through the lens of the good old Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And it dealt with, in the film, this idea that you have a weak president, a weak, obviously white president, influenced by this black woman, or in cahoots with this black woman, and only actually, I don't think it was a president, it was like a senator. So it was a just politician influenced by this black woman or in cahoots with her. And the only ones who can save Southern society are the KKK. So they violently take over, they take to the streets. The government, the state government in the film is like overrun by these basically what appear to be black savage type of politicians that are picking their feet, eating chicken in the state Congress, and those people are driven out. You have blacks chasing women. You have them cheating at the vote. So finally, the KKK comes in and they establish law and order and justice, and they make sure that all the blacks are turned away when it's time to vote so that things are set right. So we were looking at that episode and going like, this looks fucking awfully familiar to me. Like eerily, some like, And then now that we've jumped back in, we're in the 50s, and it's just kind of like, it's not that, oh, there's this big old threat of communism, but there is this idea that wokeism, or if you're Jordan Peterson, this postmodern / somehow, which itself is a postmodern mixture of these things, to say that postmodern Marxism is something that's infiltrated like the schools and blah blah blah, and that's this thing, and DEI, and that's a threat. And so one of the films that you talked about also was, and I'm going to spoil it, but it's like, spoiling it maybe will get people to say like, oh, I want to hear how that ties in a different way than what I'm about to say right now. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Yeah,
it was the film that I said that was the one that defined the 1950s. I think you picked a different film, but that was mine. I don't even know if Body Snatchers was on your list, was it?
It was not.
Yeah, see, that's the fascinating thing, is that we can both approach a decade, and there's so many films out there that speak to the consciousness of the era and the culture, and some of them just slip by. And I think you were a little bit surprised, and I think you were a little bit surprised that you didn't even think about it, if I remember the episode correctly.
Maybe. I mean, I think it's a great pick, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because it's kind of like this idea that you don't know who to fucking trust, and you don't know who's been so-called taken over by whatever. I mean, in the film, it's not this, but what we're talking about, it metaphorically, is like by this ideology, and the idea that anyone can be a communist, and that communism is this ideology that's gone viral, and it's going viral, and it's such a threat. And my pick was actually Rear Window, which is kind of like, which fits in with it in terms of like, well, let's spy on each other. Let's not just from a voyeuristic, like psychological Hitchcockian perspective, but also the paranoia of like, well, anyone can be potentially guilty of anything, and we have to watch them, and because they could have been invaded by the body snatchers. You know what I mean? Like, so like, then it becomes participating in the surveillance of your neighbors. So it's interesting in these times to look back and extrapolate and take from what we talked about and apply it to now, even though then we were taking what we were talking about and applying it to then based on what had come before. So it is interesting to see these waves of history, and the discussion of those waves continue to wash over us. That was episode 384. This is an interesting process because it's so like so layered to look back this way.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Next, we did Jodorowsky's El Topo, episode 385. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Well, admittedly, I think the most important thing to talk about that episode is Jodorowsky is like a layered artist in the sense of what he means to the film, what he means to film culture. There's the incredible imagery that he's putting on the screen with both El Topo and the Holy Mountain, but there's also the idea of what he could have done with a film that you and I both, or at least a film that both you and I admire, Jodorowsky's Dune, which was a documentary talking about one of the greatest movies never made. But I also said that there is no way that the film could have been made. I don't think that Jodorowsky's vision could have truly been achieved, and even if it had been, it never would have been in keeping with whatever the novel was. I think it would have been I think we called the episode Madman's Miracle, Jodorowsky's El Topo, which the movie itself is just this strange South American Western concerning a society that it's very much a film of cinema, which meaning that it's a film that is very aware of the history of cinema. Howard Hawks, John Ford, the Stranger, the Lonesome. It's some of the things that, and this has never really been addressed, but it's a lot of people talk about the man with no name and the mystery of that character. Well, I would argue that the mystery of that character was born in the Holy Mountain, because John Wayne, the characters that John Wayne played in both John Ford's films, Howard Hawks films, and the other numerous westerns that were made during that period, John Wayne was never the laconic, lonesome, mysterious and quiet stranger. That was more Holy Mountain, and I think it would.
You mean Topo?
Yes, El Topo. I'm sorry. Yes, it was more El Topo, and I think it would come out to a more mainstream interpretation with Leone's Fistful of Dollars in like 63 or however much later. But wait a minute, El Topo was the 70s.
Yeah, El Topo is late. El Topo is later.
So it wasn't so much an influence as it was basically running with the idea of the mysterious stranger. So it's like it's expanding on the groundwork that Leone had made in 63, 64, whenever Fistful of Dollars came out. But it was also much different in the sense that it was a wild and surrealistic. It was a Leone film on acid, I guess, is the best way that I could describe it. It was this kind of controlled chaos. And I remember seeing it thinking that I had already seen The Holy Mountain. You and I had gone to see that in downtown LA. And I wasn't prepared for that kind of thing, but I was overwhelmed by a film of poetic power. So where I might have been dismissive of something that went away from what was accepted and expected of a Western, it was really one of those things that opened my eyes to the potential and the possibilities of the poetics of the medium. I don't think I would. Jodorowsky's Western is unlike any Western ever made.
Yeah, he said he wanted to make an Eastern.
Yeah, and I think it was. I think it's brilliant. I think it's a brilliant film. And it just it's Jodorowsky for me is one of those guys where it's like I wish I could have seen more of him, but I don't know if more of him would have been possible. I don't know how far you can take Jodorowsky's mind, and I don't know how much of it can be realized on screen. He's that unique a filmmaker that he might be bigger than the medium itself. I don't mean to be.
Yeah, he's definitely a unique character in cinema history.
Yeah. So yeah, El Topo, incredible film. If you haven't seen it, take a look at the movie and then listen to the episode 385. That was a great conversation. Good times. Yeah.
You did Oxbow Incident?
The Oxbow Incident, I don't think you've ever seen. I think you were out of town, and I was. It was one of those solo episodes where I would pop open a bottle and just sit there. And the Oxbow Incident for me was another Western, William Wellman and Henry Fonda, this great Americana type character who people believed in, people loved, and to see a lynching on screen and the power of mob insanity and mob rule, and it was a powerful and disturbing film, and it was also troubling because it's like whatever you're seeing on screen, was 1,000 times worse in real life. And if you've never seen the film, it's I don't even think it's 80 minutes long. It might be 80, 85 minutes long or something like that. It's a very short film, but they're packing a lot of ideas into it, and it's kind of what it is, I guess, is sad to know that this is the world we live in, and this is what this is the kind of behavior and sadism and cruelty that human beings are capable of. I think it's a great film, and I think it's a film that more people should see, because you want to talk about the good old days and you want to talk about where we come from. This is a big factor in that. It's not a film that you should skip over. We did our next episode was Two Lane Blacktop, Monty Hellman's road film, which played more as I guess you would say an existential look at male bravado, car culture, and machismo. And you have two rock stars, James Taylor and Dennis Wilson, but the driving force of the film is Warren Oates, who, when you watch this film, you realize this is a guy that should have been given more opportunities. I mean, I don't want to dismiss his character actor work, his supporting roles in films like The Wild Bunch or oh God, he blended into the background so often in so many films, but he was one of those actors that when you saw him on screen, you realized that you were seeing something special. And in the handful of films where he had a starring role, I can think of this one and the masterpiece, really his masterpiece and Peckinpah's masterpiece, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. You saw somebody who was able to dig into something that was deeper and more layered and tortured. I think Warren Oates, along with a handful of other guys, including Strother Martin, cats like that, were just incredible presence on film. Yeah.
We did Fellini's Satyricon.
Well, if you're going to go into it, give the whole story, goddammit, because
give the whole story.
Give the whole trailer. Well, just give me the trailer. I want to hear the trailer again. What's up?
I said, 2,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. All you need to know is that it's the Italian master Federico Fellini looking at Rome. And the idea is that if you want to see what this film is, it's the period, and this is not me making this up. This is the description is that it's Rome before Christ, but after Fellini.
That's one of the funniest things I've ever heard.
Before Christ,
after Fellini,
but after Fellini. So you have characters fighting over a boy that they want to marry. With like a sea wedding. It's very romantic. It's crazy. It's nuts.
It's an utterly insane film, but it's interesting to watch in the context of Fellini's filmography, because I've watched quite a bit of Fellini up until this point. I many years ago I purchased the Criterion box set, which is something like 13 or 14 films, and it's interesting to see early Fellini as an almost popular filmmaker, making films that were within the expectations of what a film narrative should be, and slowly morph into this dreamlike world that he would create. I don't know if it was starting with 8.5, but 8.5 seems to be the one where the floodgates were open to what Fellini's imagination was capable of. And then once I saw Satyricon, I knew that nothing was a fluke, nothing was accidental. There was more there that would give birth to true dreamers, including, David Lynch, a couple of decades later, Jodorowsky to a degree. The true poets of cinema can be found in those early foreign films, especially Fellini. I think Fellini's greatest gift to cinema was the possibility of poetry on film, and an understanding that the emotion and aura of a scene was sometimes enough to propel a story. So if you had a story that didn't make any kind of sense narratively, it didn't matter because it made sense on a subconscious level. Does that make
Right.
sense? I mean,
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I mean, I agree with your assessment, but I also agree with that idea. I
mhm,
agree with the philosophy of like shit doesn't need to make sense in a narrative way. It can make sense in an experiential
mhm,
and subconscious way. Yes,
yeah.
on both of those levels. Absolutely,
Yeah, I think that's the
absolutely.
thing, that
And
when you find somebody like him who was able to realize these great images and these great ideas and tap into something of the culture and humanity and who we are as a people and what we're capable of, to speak on the times and to speak about the beauty of art, Fellini stands head and shoulders above so many of the other filmmakers of his time. I mean, when you talk about cinema, especially 1960s, 70s cinema, you I think there's about three names that come up. There's Bergman, there's Kurosawa, there's Fellini. Those are the titans. Those are and there are a number of other filmmakers who were doing incredible work. Antonioni, um, later on with Truffaut, Godard, um, but I think it's kind of a shame that an artist isn't given an opportunity to just express themselves in so many ways, especially with the expense of filmmaking being a great detriment, a great
barrier.
barrier. Yeah, um, a great barrier to overcome. But when you have somebody who is as singularly out there and inventive and creative and willing to take chances. When you have somebody like a Fellini who's willing to go into to the subconscious in the way that Bergman was willing to go into the dynamics of romance and couples, and when you have that level of trust in the world of dreams, and an understanding that if I put it up there, it might not make sense it might not make sense to you if you're going out of your way to find to understand it, but that it is somehow understandable on a psychic level, on an unconscious, in your subconscious level. There's something about your subconscious that grabs a hold of these images and pulls you into them because we have them. A man climbing out of his car and then being lifted into the sky by a balloon, or however the fuck 8.5 opens up. It's incredible. And then when you have Satyricon, which is basically
A
a
Roman
history,
orgy,
yeah,
basically.
basically, yeah, a history of Rome and
And
the orgies and the
and
decadence. Unbelievable.
but the thing about it too is that he pushes it so far to and I mentioned this idea of like these characters fighting over this boy.
Yeah.
Um, he creates it's the absurdity of it is not that they would that at certain points in history, whether that's true or accurate or whatever based on the historical aspect, but it's the fact that he plays it up so much, and he's not making a moral commentary on it. It's almost like if this were true, if all the things that we've heard about Rome, let's say they're true,
Mm-hmm.
it's as if the people in those times also understand that there is almost kind of like this reputation that they themselves have to live up to. So they're like, we're gonna fucking be the most Roman of all the Romans, and we're gonna be the craziest. We're gonna be the most absurd, regardless of whether absurdity was a cultural value or not. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that he stacks up the levels of absurdity to where it could be something that, regardless of what era you live in, it could be something very mundane or something that's seen as not as extreme as like the way he builds up people fighting over someone else that's basically going to be their slave slash spouse. Something like buying food. He's going to turn it into this over the top, absurd act that itself will almost seem offensive somehow.
Yeah.
Or so extreme, so it's so blown up, and it's so beautiful that it's like overwhelming, and you're laughing, and you're just kind of like, this movie's nuts.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first saw it, it was so fun because it was so. There was something very like liberating about it because of the creativity and the outlandishness of it. And it's kind of like going with what you're saying as well, is that it's kind of like you're seeing someone just be very expressive. And in that sense, it's like it is like Jodorowsky, where it's just this unbridled creativity. And the counter argument could always be, well, unbridled creativity is self-indulgence. And yes, there is room for that argument, obviously. But without the possibility of veering into self-indulgence, then there's a level of constraint that risks that create to have that level of constraint kind of can lead to no expression at all. Only like a shadow or a sliver of expression. Only partial expression, where it's like, well, I'm not going to be self-indulgent, so I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to do what's been done before. Because if I step out of that, if I step out of bounds, then that's a step too far. And that kind of, we've kind of ranted our way into the 60s because that the next episode is defining the decade of the 60s, and that's kind of the cultural struggle. Is you have a generation coming of age saying, well, do I step out of bounds? Do I go for unbridled creativity? Do I go for the madness? Do I live, and these films are 60s films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, El Topo it came out in the 70s. Well, it came out in 1970. But in my list, I cheated by not being strict to like, okay, 1960 to 1969,
Mm-hmm.
Because the idea that, well, the influence, the 60s didn't necessarily end with Altamont in December of 69. When people talk about, and I'll keep talking about this, but because it's one of those things that like is like a super marker for, it's kind of like, well, in the same way that, not in the same way, because this is more extreme, 9/11 is more extreme, but 9/11 is one of those markers that you can say, well, that was really the end of the 20th century. You could say that. You could say, like people do, oh, well, the 60s, what killed the 60s were the Manson murders and Altamont. The Woodstock film, 1970. El Topo, 1970. Zabriskie Point, and I'm going to just put it out there because it's kind of like, who the fuck knows about, have you heard of Zabriskie Point? Some of you have. I would argue that most of you haven't. If I'm wrong, then I'm happy to be wrong that more people know about that film. Not because it's a great film, but because I think it's one of the films that defines the 60s. Mm-hmm. These things blur. These things don't end when the calendar ends. They end when they end, But it was one of those, and I'm looking at our lists, it's interesting to see also in our interpretation of the way, when we look at these things, it's kind of like, well, Rick's list is Cool Hand Luke. Mm-hmm. And I'm not in any particular order, but like Bonnie and Clyde, The Wild Bunch, Fistful of Dollars. My list is Invocation of My Demon Brother, El Topo, Woodstock, Easy Rider. So there's also interesting, like how, like what are we shining our light on? Those are kind of like the ones that are on the margin, and then the ones that are in the center. For example, that like I think Night of the Living Dead was actually I think that was I don't have it in the slot here because I didn't write it in, but I have it circled on my side, so it looks like, to me, that's what you would have picked as your number one.
I think it was. I think because it spoke a lot about civil rights. It spoke about the growing distrust and that movie is a commentary on both race relations, Vietnam. It's talking a great deal about the problems of society, and if you look at these decade episodes, what we're mostly focusing on are the problems of the decade, of the problem. It's very rarely a happy film that embraces brotherhood and how great it is to exist among each other. It really is the conflict that exists either between genders, race, class, and in a lot of cases, it's all of those three things every decade, but in different narrative styles. So you're seeing noirs, you're seeing westerns, noir is the paranoia and the anger and the distrust of a country that has forgotten about the men that had shipped off to war after they've come back and are trying to restructure their lives and get a handle on everything. The westerns of the 60s were a commentary on Vietnam. All of these films really do that. That's the beauty of film, is that films aren't necessarily just about the story that is being told. They're oftentimes about the times in which they're made and the attitudes of the culture.
At their best.
At their best, yeah. So that's what I loved about doing that series, and we had a lot of fun with it. I think we what did we do? 13 episodes we did from the 1900s through the 1910s all the way to 2020. And it was about it was about the culture. It was about who we are as a people, how we interact, how we treat one another. Historically, the historical markers that determine how we live. You mentioned 9/11. The world changed. Our world, at the very least, changed to a degree that it'll never go back to being what it once was. And I think if you watch movies with that kind of an understanding, you start to have a recognition of us as a species, what we're up against, what we're dealing with, and our own sense of both self-preservation and understanding of who we are. It's all there. It's in the fucking movies, whether people want to believe it or not. It's there. It's just more apparent to guys like you and me who watch these films both as entertainment but also as lessons for life.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because the 60s is a decade that really captured my imagination as an adolescent, because as you described before, it was like we were always receiving messages from the past. We were always hearing about. I mean, for me, it was like constantly, and the Zapruder film is. I included the Zapruder film in my list of films that defined the decade. Which is the Zapruder film is the. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
No, that's when I realized that the idea of these episodes was bigger than just popular entertainment and just film as a source of entertainment. That was the first. I don't know if that was the first time, but that was one of the earliest instances where I did realize, oh shit, this is about the moving image, what it captures, what it misses, how that can be manipulated, how it can grab a hold of our psyche and control us for even 60, 70 years later. We're still talking about that. You and I will go back to JFK at some point. Oliver Stone did a documentary, JFK Revisited. We will go back to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's this footage that went viral, basically. And the Zapruder film is the footage of JFK's assassination. It's any images that you've seen are it's linked to that. And in 1994, it was the 25th anniversary of Woodstock, and all of what happened in '69. So it was Charles Manson and Woodstock and all this shit. And so I was really aware of all of that stuff, and I think I was fortunate. We were all fortunate to kind of have that moment in history when you would have retrospectives, you would have people talking about these things, you would have people, so that there was a connection to the past. The histories of rock and roll, which I've talked about multiple times, and to be able to look at all these things and kind of, it was very this Matrix moment where you plug in to all this shit from the past and you're just downloading all of this history and culture. And you can learn about, just as you were learning about the actual historical political events, you're also learning about the cultural historical events, and you're able to link those in your mind, and say, well, this is not only, as you said, it's not only about entertainment. It's also about politics. It's not only about history. It's also about a critique. It's the narrative and the counter narrative. And then today, when I think about the times that we're living in, and I question, because of social media, because of the attention economy, which is what social media is, because of all of this shit, where race relations are, and in the country now, and the backlash, and I question now, as a person in middle age, I question, okay, if you think about counterculture, and you think about what a part of and what the countercultural experiments were in the 60s and into the 70s, and how ultimately the narrative has been that counterculture failed because that peace and love movement that involved the hippies, rock music, um, politics, drugs, etc., that basically fizzled out and became nihilism in the 70s, which led to punk rock and a different version of resistance. Like, what does that look like now? And I am actively engaging that question, engaging with the question as a as a middle-aged hippie now, you know what I mean? Slash, not hippie, but exposed to it, to where it's like both my wife and mother talk about me, and they're like, he acts like he lived in those times when he describes it.
Yeah.
And the other night I was telling Leslie, I was like, I don't subscribe to reincarnation, but at the same time, it's kind of like, because of these forms of media, it's as if in this strange way, because my adolescence was a secondhand experience of what those times was, but with such an identification. Not that I'm like, oh, I pretend that I'm from those times. It's not that. It's this weird like witnessing. And I use that verb. And so as I play with those ideas and as I witness what we're happening now, it's like, okay, well, how do we resist? And how to resist, regardless of what your age is, but how to resist in these times if you are inclined to resist, if you're disgusted, if how to resist in a way that is multifaceted, the way that the resistance movements were then, to where it's not just overtly political, but it's also personal. It's like, well, it's ecological. It's like motherfuckers like would start gardens. You know what I mean? It's like the idea also of like of love is it. When I think about it, it is this revolutionary principle. The philosopher Elaine, what's his last name? I can't think of his last name right now. He says when one becomes two, that is a revolution, and he just doesn't mean like joint, like safety in numbers, like that. He also means like what Muhammad Ali said when Muhammad Ali said me, we, where there's the connection between one to another. In these times when people don't know who the fuck to trust, and people aren't communicating with one another, they're only sending fucking memes to make each other laugh, and some assholes getting rich, and we're getting stupid. Like, can it be political to actually call someone on the phone and talk to them versus, you know what I mean? Like, versus only existing within the channels that we've been conditioned to exist in, to write someone a letter. And in that sense, I look back on some of those ideals of the 60s and the idea of love, and whether it's brotherly love, like I am everyday people shit, like we've got to live together, whatever the fuck that song says, like those kind of things, and how can that be used as a way of sustaining hope in these dark times? That's my rant.
No, I think it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's the 60s were about hope until they weren't. And that's we need to get back to that. I think we definitely need to get back to an idea of saving ourselves through art and saving each
Exactly.
other. Yeah.
Exactly. And go ahead.
No, go ahead, because I'm moving
Well,
into something else. So go ahead.
yeah. I mean, yeah. And this is kind of like approaching. This is approaching already like into the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like we have to fight nihilism,
Mm-hmm.
and into the 70s, and because right now the next episode that we did was it was Easy Riders and Raging Bulls. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like a decade under the influence. It's Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, how the sex, drugs, and rock and roll generation saved Hollywood. That out of the 60s into the 70s is what creates a renaissance in Hollywood. And when you're able to take all the turmoil and turn it into some form of expression, that is also a form of resistance in a society that tells you to not express yourself, to only express yourself as a consumer. And now Hollywood itself is a corporate environment, and it's an industry, but there is always that struggle between the show and the biz. And so you have the Scorseses, you have the Spielbergs, you have, this goes into fucking Star Wars shit. It's like the originals where it was like A New Hope. We were talking about Hope. That's the episode 4. And after A New Hope, it's fucking The Empire Strikes Back. And to many of us, it may feel like right now the Empire has struck back. And out of that is the fucking Return of the Jedi, which is ultimately a resistance movement involving also some form of like spirituality or something, but but that can also mean creativity. That can also mean creativity in all forms. Like how do we do this? We did New Hollywood, which is Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. We did. I'm using these as a chunk.
Mm-hmm.
We did Duel.
Yeah.
We did THX 1138.
Mm-hmm.
So Duel is Spielberg, and it's this person being chased by a fucking big rig, this machine that is just chasing him down. There's a metaphor there. George Lucas's THX 1138, episode 392, is Robert Duvall in this fucking dystopian world, and his goal is to break out. What does all that mean? How does one do that? How does it? You watch THX 1138, one of my favorite endings in cinema.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to see.
Why is it that, like, I mean, I think it's part of the human condition, the desire to escape. Escape what? Some things it's kind of like, I think it's built in, this idea of like, well, I'm alive. I don't want to necessarily escape that, although sometimes people do. Oftentimes people do. But it's also the conditions that they find themselves in and their interpretation of those conditions that lead to that. And
well, I think one of the telling... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, no, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the telling things about a film like THX 1138 and these dystopian views of the future that would see their culmination with Ridley Scott's Blade Runner is the loss of humanity that goes into it. So not necessarily the loss of our being able of our respecting each other. Not that's not what I'm talking about with humanity. I'm talking about our humanity, our beings as humans, as the the slow the slow embracing of automation and artificial intelligence that would slowly take over society and would basically make us cogs in the machinery. So, what's great about that is that you're seeing this whole period from this whole 1970s period is both interesting and troubling because what it's basically doing is showing us how far we've sold out to the idea of comfort and what this you had Altamont, you had Vietnam, you had the Kennedy assassination, and not to mention the assassination of both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. This slow disintegration of American culture, American society, and when I say that, I say it full well knowing that the rest of the world is affected by it as well. So there's this idea in those films of losing control and no longer being able to trust anything that is around you, which is in a way becoming automated and becoming robotic, and that's a lot of what is in these films. That truck that is chasing down Dennis Weaver in Spielberg's Duel, it's emotionless. It's not. It's brilliant that Spielberg never shows you the man driving the truck. You never see any. All you know is that truck, that there is something in there pushing it.
Mm-hmm.
But for all we know, it's the truck. The danger is the truck. It's this robotic creation that is bent on destroying for no other reason but for having been slighted. And then with THX 1138, a film that I didn't particularly care for, because I don't think George Lucas is I think George Lucas is an incredible visionary, but a very poor director. The idea of what is on screen is incredible, and it's something that would find its logical and artistic conclusion in Ridley Scott's Alien, James Cameron's The Terminator and Terminator 2, Judgment Day, aspects of Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall and RoboCop. I mean, it's this idea that humanity and human beings can be forced into being simply embers. Like the fire can go out, but the ember still exists. The fight against dystopia, the fight against the loss of humanity. That's the brilliance of both Duel and THX 1138, and later on, Blade Runner, Terminator, all these films that you have to have something that you care about, and it's kind of an awakening if you watch them with the right mindset and say, holy fuck, how many times do I go to work and I forget what the fuck it is that I'm doing. There are times when I go to work and I was talking to somebody and a friend of mine said, sometimes at the end of the day, I'm tired as all fuck, but I can't think of anything that I did. I can't remember. I feel like I did nothing. And I said, that's funny because I feel like I'm tired as fuck at the end of the day. And I know I did a shitload, but I can't remember anything that I did.
Well, it's like
it's the loss. It's becoming the robot. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, and this is fucking Industrial Revolution shit. Like it's like, well, we know we did shit.
Yeah.
But what did you accomplish?
Yeah.
We know you did shit, but what did you create?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are definitely those careers and jobs where it's kind of like, oh, I saved a baby. I delivered a baby. I did you know what I mean? Like that's that. I think for the vast majority of people, though, it's kind of like, well, I know I traded my time for money.
Yeah.
I know I did that. And when you look at the calendar, you know, these episodes that we did were in 2022. It is now 2025. And I know that these hours that we spend talking about these things, this is what time well spent because it is expressive and creative. But it's like it becomes one of these things where it's separate from this, but in general, where people you're going, how is it that time used to pass so slowly, and now the closer I am to death, it passes more quickly? Where did my fucking life go?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. I've told you, and many times I went to sleep. I was 25 years old. I went to sleep. I woke up. I was 50. I don't know what the fuck happened. It's a blur. It's a blur. I know there were good times. I know there were a lot of laughs. There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of suffering. There were rewards. There were moments when you feel like a fucking god, especially when you do what we did, which was, you know, and it's an exaggeration, but it is in a sense true about how you feel when you're standing on that stage and you're expressing yourself in a way that connects with people. It was never at the point where it was on a grand level, but we tasted it. And I see it in these films as well. I see, you know, the fact that we're talking about, most often you and I are talking about films that are anywhere between 25 and 100 years old. Now that's fucking insane. That's fucking insane. You know, I took my nephew last week to see David Fincher's Seven. That movie's 30 years old. It's 30 some odd years old. I saw it in 1995.
Yeah, I mean, and I have a CD in my car. The CD I have in my car, Downward Spiral, and anything else, that's fucking like, yeah, it's like 30 fucking years old.
Yeah.
31 years old.
It's incredible. I think the point is that these movies, the music, the television shows, the books, we take them in, and I don't know if they define us, but they add to the definition of who we are. And we adopt behavior, attitudes. You and I always talk beforehand about what's going on in our lives, and we get into the details, the messiness, the shit that we love, the shit that we don't understand, the shit that is driving us nuts. And we always talk about it in this way where, you know, I always imagine it's cinematic, where we're telling stories to each other, and they're like little movies that we're telling to each other. That's the way I see it. That's how it plays out in my mind. It might not be that way for you. It might not be that way for other people, but it certainly does with me. I know, you know what I mean? I know the cast of characters, and I know the setting. So it's already like, right. You know, you're playing it. That's the power of film. And it's like, you're playing these stories over in your head. And when you get to a point, we talk a little bit about the promise of the 1960s. The 1970s were the bleakness. Easy Drugs and Raging Egos, episode 390, A Decade Under the Influence. What does that say? It's talking about how it's a play on the drug culture, but it's also a play on the artistic freedom that was discovered through being able to express oneself in an artistic manner before the barbarians closed the gates once again, because it's always going to be a matter of the studio heads and the money figuring out a way to wrestle it to the ground and control it. We have the potential for great art, and yet it's bogged down by the minutia and by the greed of pushing a more simplistic and an obvious narrative. You and I talked a couple of weeks ago about either Netflix or Amazon commissioning scripts where people announce who they are when they come into a room on a scene, because Netflix or Amazon, whoever the fuck is producing these projects, is saying a lot of what we show is background.
Yeah.
So they're catering to the idea of people who aren't even paying attention to what's on the fucking screen.
Right.
What we need is another artistic and cultural revolution. We can take notes from the late 60s and the early 70s and the mid 70s. But more importantly, we have to look at 78, 79, 80, where it all fell apart. The excesses became more than what the studios were willing to allow, and it was wrestled back. The 1970s, the brilliance of the 1970s would lead into the greed and entitlement of the 1980s. Everything is a reaction. Everything is an opposite and equal reaction to what has come before. So the 70s for me was that period where you understood what the medium was capable of. For you were luckier. You lived through the decade that meant the most for you. I was going back in time. I had to live vicariously through something that my parents were experiencing. Yours was of the time. You were of your time.
In the 90s.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. And we're going to get to that in some episode 5 from now. I don't know.
It's crazy because it's kind of like, which decade of the decades that mean the most to me that I lived through? Do you mean the 60s or the 70s or the 80s?
Yeah.
And it's crazy because we followed that up with the breaking down the gates, defining the 70s. We did parts 1 and parts 2.
Yeah.
And these fucking, like, the lists, like, Network was for both of us. And we recently did, like, an episode on Network.
Yeah.
On my list was A Clockwork Orange.
Okay. Yeah.
Which we recently did. But the violence, the Death Wish.
Yeah, Death Wish
Deer
was on my list. Yeah.
Yeah, fucking Star Wars was on your list. The you can't ignore.
No, it's
however you feel about it. Even if you're a fucking Trekkie, you can't fucking ignore that phenomenon. And I mean, there someone at work. I've recently begun recommending movies friend of mine from work to this guy, and I'm like, but in the context of philosophy.
Okay, yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, you want a movie that takes all these different ideas and plays with them and throws them into a story, and there's all kinds of references about everything. Matrix, okay, that one's like, boom, like you're gonna play with that for a while. Talking about power and what power can do, and how that, like the Nietzsche quote of like, when fighting monsters, beware lest you yourself become a monster. The Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. Yeah, I know you put Godfather 2 in your list for the 70s.
Yeah.
Taxi Driver for us was the number one for both of us. Mm-hmm. Before I get into that, going back to Star Wars, it's kind of like same thing. Not only power, but also like when fighting monsters, beware that you yourself do not become one. Star Wars can just be thrown away as like fluff, or at this point, it's just a fucking industry unto itself. But at the same time, it can't be thrown away because it's like, it's got some stuff in there. You know what I mean? It's got, this is why Joseph Campbell was like, all the Jungian fucking hero with 1,000 faces shit. Star Wars is like a good example of all of that hero's journey shit, because it's like you can follow those points and you can learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
Whether you agree, disagree, or whatever, you can still learn a lot from it. And over the course of the 9 films, let's just take the 9, because they blow it up and zoom in and zoom out. You see how these different characters are playing different, the ideas of self-sacrifice, the ideas of betrayal, the ideas of betraying one's family, of all, it's a different side of Godfather there. With more sequels and more versions of Part 3 for The Godfather, but whatever. And the same thing with Taxi Driver. It's like, when fighting monsters, like, beware not to become one. But it's also like, well, did he become one, or was he already one? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? And
well, I think that one's pretty obvious. But what created that? Right. Vietnam vet, filth of a city. People can become overwhelmed. People can. The world can just be too much. I think there's the possibility for PTSD in just existing in this world, and depending on the fragility of the psyche, what ends up happening. Travis Bickle, I think, is more relevant in 2025 than he might have been in 76. Now that's a very frightening idea. This is a character that has stayed with us for 40 years because of 50 years. It's a character that stayed with us for close to 50 years because of what it says about the culture as a whole, and possibly what human beings are. I mean, I have to wonder, is that who we are and we fight it? Or is it a unique? Well, it's obviously not unique. Who's the guy? Mark David Chapman. Obviously, John Hinckley. The Columbine Massacre, Sandy Hook. I mean, there's a lot out there that speaks to. There are a lot of children of Travis Bickle.
Oh yeah,
and it's frightening. It's very frightening.
And there are a lot of parents of Travis Bickle,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's they have websites where you can see like how many mass shootings there were like this week or whatever. Like there's mass shootings all the time. Like, like we think of these big ones that tend to get the focus. The Columbines. Did Alex Jones make up a story about this one, or did he say this, or did this person get sued because of that, or conspiracy and blah blah blah. There's shootings all the time.
Yeah, no doubt.
And it's like, this is nuts. And not just shootings of like robberies. I'm talking about like those types of active shooter events.
Sure.
And thoughts and prayers.
So much to the point where there are active shooting drills at just about every major event, major stores. What to do in the case of. I don't remember that when I was a kid.
I wrote in my notes for the 70s, and it's highlighted. I wrote, in America, your options are escape, parenthetical says get rich, become a hero, parenthetical become famous, or kill everyone.
Yeah, it's about right. I can't disagree with that.
I'm trying to see what the context is in terms of like where I placed that line in my list of films. It just stood out to me, and so it's kind of like let the context speak for itself. But it's just what it is, This is just Taxi Driver is such a metaphor.
Yeah.
And we are in our own version of a dystopia. And to a certain extent, we always have been.
Yeah, but it's not always been so clear.
I think it's been just different versions of it. Right now, we are actually, in constitutional crisis. So it's like, you fucking think of the early 70s. It was like May 70, the Kent State, the National Guard troops killed students at Kent State. National Guard troops killed fucking student protesters. They shot them. And there's a picture. If you look up Kent State, you'll see it. There are different pictures, but there's a famous one of this young woman like kneeling, like screaming over like the prone body of this student. Like Neil Young did, I think the Ohio. It's about that. This was in response to Vietnam, Cambodia, and the idea of soldiers in the streets, soldiers at the border. Can they shoot protesters? This stuff is not new, but this stuff is I say this a lot. Like, you want to see all this fucked up shit, look out your window.
Yeah.
But I would also say, look at the screens to watch these films. Look at the mirrors. Look out your window, not in a rear window type of way, But maybe put down the phone a little bit.
Well, I think it comes down to one thing: engage.
To know when to engage and when to disengage, and how to try to. I mean, that's the difficult thing, is to how to do that, and to learn to still take deep readings of what we're seeing rather than just perceiving vibes, and scrolling past it. So that when the other day in passing, we were at someone's house and we were watching, like, they had the football game, and then they had like they showed the halftime show, and so when Kendrick Lamar says the revolution will be televised, and Samuel L. Jackson is basically playing a role of like the black Uncle Sam, but trying to like keep him in line. And he says something to the effect of like, because I don't know this kind of music, I don't know, I'm not into that, but he says something along the lines of like, you picked the right, or this is the right time but the wrong guy, something to that effect. And it's kind of like, yes, there are people that are just dismissing and just saying like, fuck it, it's just the fucking fuck this nigger, we're making all this money. Let the Roman citizens be happy with all of this while we rake it in. There are also levels of commentary happening in front of the dictators that they may not even bother or care to understand. So it's kind of like, not only like, okay, yeah, that's fucking cool, like, okay, blah blah. Oh shit, he talked about Drake. He did the song about Drake. They're not like us. This can also mean other shit. You know what I mean? It's like, who? Like the people, Rupert Murdoch, who was there. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
It's like they're not like us. They don't give a fuck about you.
It depends on if you're listening.
I mean, the fucking people who own these platforms that we use to watch these things don't give a fuck about us. So we have to engage with our history, and we're doing it through cinema because it's also like, this is the method that we're using, one of them, but in terms of what we talk about. And this is an episode that is a political episode because they all are.
Yeah.
And if that's like boring to you, then it's kind of like, well, hey, it's about to get real exciting, so just don't worry about us. Your life is going to get super interesting. Don't worry about being bored. You don't have to be.
You're not gonna have time to be bored.
Yeah. But we're going to continue to do these things where we look back and preach and pontificate and act like we know more than we do. And we're going to continue to do new old shit.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in for a wild ride, all of us. And we're going to try to like make sense of, these films. Films are like the tea leaves that we're reading. And film is the crystal ball. It's these things that we're trying to look into this vast universe of history, of art, of entertainment, of all of these things, but not only to be entertained, but to engage with someone else's creativity, understanding that yes, there is business model behind it, there is all that, and people do also deserve to to get paid for their labors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all about not being a passive viewer, but actually engaging with the films, so that they actually mean more than just some shit that's in the background, playing while life goes on outside of us.
Absolutely. Now, that being said, let the people know how they can contribute to keeping us in the foreground. How we don't have to.
If you want to support us, if you want to support us, and we're talking small shit, whenever, if and when. If you want to, I mean, obviously, like, you want to give us your inheritance, we would probably say no, but
probably.
But we will inherit some coffee from you. So buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. Buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. This is for Slim Slim, for being generous, for being a listener. Everyone else, particularly him in this moment, but everyone else, thanks for listening. We're going to keep doing this shit and trying to make sense of all of this shit as we go. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, folks. Bye-bye now.